here is a pack that, once they figured out how to get around the town, there was 2 wolf packs in it. And all the elk were right there in town. And of course, this presented a public safety issue because the elk were cabbing in town, and they were injuring people. It wasn't so much the bulls during the rut, it was the cows, and they weren't killing tourists. They almost killed some locals because it's one lady in particular that started off all the research and all the whole revamping of park policy. She was just out jogging on a Sunday morning. She didn't realize that, 10 minutes before she jogged on this trail, she'd been jogging on all her life because she's a full-time resident in Banff, and this cow elk just had a calf right on the trail. And the elk came down and stomped her. And some lady in the house that was adjacent saw this happen. Well, Canada has had budget cuts at that time, just like we had. So there was no wardens on duty on Sunday morning early, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police weren't on duty either. So it took an hour for someone to get up there and try to control this elk. And every time the woman would try to get up, the elk would just stomp her into the ground and almost killed her. So that's what set off this whole massive research program, and why I got to do research up there, and they revised their whole policy and did all sorts of other stuff like that. Okay, and unlike our Park Service, the Fish and Wildlife Service, Park Canada fully admits what's happened, what the wolves are done. Based on my historical analysis and archaeological record, they realized that there never were large numbers of elk in this system, and it's mainly because of native hunting and other kinds of things like that. Park Canada fully admits, they've done their own studies, that in addition to having this 80% or more impact on the number of elk in the Bow Valley, the wolves have annihilated the moose population, and they've annihilated the mountain caribou. Parks Canada fully admits this stuff, and all this has been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Okay? This is not like this is hidden in the gray literature, and you have to believe what I'm saying on this. I can give you all the scientific papers, or we can give you Cliff White's email address, even though Cliff is retired now, and he can send you all these publications and studies if you're reminded to read all that stuff. Okay, now we'll talk a little bit about Yellowstone, but a part about Yellowstone different from the main debate. Since at least 1950, 600 to 700 food-limited elk have wintered in the thermal areas along the Firehole, Gibbon, and Madison Rivers in the west central portion of Yellowstone National Park. These elk, like the elk in Banff, these elk do not leave the park. Okay, this is not the northern herd. This is the one, as you'll see, that are around Mammoth Junction. So this is a figure here, right from a book, a whole large thick book that has been published on the central Yellowstone ecosystem. This is Madison Junction right here, where the campground is. You ever been to Yellowstone? West Yellowstone sits out here. This is Norris Geyser Basin here. This is the Gibbon River comes down here. This is Old Faithful here, and the Firehole goes up in this direction, and this is the junction here, and then it becomes the Madison, where the Gibbon joins the Firehole. And these rivers stay open all winter because they're being fed by these thermal waters from these hot springs, if you've ever been to Yellowstone. Well, this is a distribution of elk prior to the wolves. Okay? They did not put any wolves here, but when the wolf population built on the northern range, where they let them loose in a soft release, the elk spilled over to other parts of the park. This is part of the Yellowstone story we haven't heard before, unless you follow this from a scientific perspective and have read this 650-page book. Okay, it's in there somewhere in the middle. So you can see that the elk were distributed all through here, concentrated on this. And then this is after when the wolves colonize it. You can see the habitat still there. There's no longer any elk. And that's the way it is today. The elk numbers have fallen to less than 100, and the researchers are predicting extinction. They're predicting that the wolves are going to take the elk to extinction. The only reason there's any elk left here at all is because of the deep waters of the Madison River. One of the things all these ungulates do, moose, elk, and deer, when they're attacked by predators, be they bears or wolves, they try to flee into water because they can, their legs are longer and stuff on it. The predator legs are shorter. They can avoid the predation pressure. And so these elk are sitting on an island. This is a photo that I just had the secretary scan in from this book. This is an island of Madison, and if the wolves come along, the elk just go stand in the deep water. Now, if the elk did try fleeing into the Firehole and Gibbon rivers, but if you've ever been to Yellowstone, these rivers are quite shallow in most places. Okay, as you can see here, there's a wolf here and a wolf here. And again, this picture I took right out of this book. Okay, and so there's an elk pounding calf right there, and the wolves just went in there and killed the calf. And the reason the wolves can take the elk to extinction is because there's bison in the system. Okay, it sounds counterintuitive, and people think, well, if you add a second prey species in, it will buffer the predation pressure on the first species. That's not the way it works. This is called predator-mediated competition or apparent competition. And what happens is, the wolves, because they can survive on bison, but they're harder to kill on that stuff, whenever they run across a more vulnerable elk, and if they catch it in a place in the deep river, they just kill it. That's why the wolves will be able to take these elk populations to extinction. This is called predator-mediated competition, and it turns out, as I'll explain in a moment, this is the norm throughout predation across North America, more than the exception. Okay. I've done quite a bit of research on elk and deer for the county commissioners in San Juan County. San Juan County sits in the very southeast part of Utah. It's one of the largest counties in the United States, and it's one of the least populated. Okay? And there's a place there called Elk Ridge. Okay? This is a very remote part of Utah. These are the bears here, rising about 9,100 feet. This picture was taken out of an airplane in the wintertime in a low snow year. The point of putting this in here, even though there's no wolves here, so this is not a wolf story, it turns out to be a mountain lion story. Okay? But this is a very remote area. There's no private land virtually in here. Okay? It's all public land. The upper part of Elk Ridge is owned by the Forest Service. The lower part is owned by the BLM. Large parts of it are already in wilderness, and if a group called the Southern Wilderness Society has their way, pretty much everything here is going to be wilderness that's not along the main road. So it's a very remote part of Utah on this type of stuff. And the whole point of all this is there's nothing out here in Elk Ridge that game departments habitually blame for the decline of mule deer throughout the West. There's no oil and gas development. There's been no logging since the 50s. There's no home development. There's no 4-lane highways. There's no one building trophy homes on the winter range, because winter everything's public property, aside from a few hundred acres. Okay? And the ranch, on the big ranch in the north, the Red Ranch, they sold out to Nature Conservancy. They still run cows on it, but Nature Conservancy, of course, restricts the number of cattle. And luckily, it got dark enough so you can see them. So there was a good thing for you running over them, everybody else. So what this data is, and again, these are not counts. This is actually the kill data. So this data comes in, and in our state, it's called the Division of Wildlife Resources. In our state, the Fish and Game Agency is not an independent agency. It was at one time, but it's now just a division within the Department of Natural Resources. So it's called DWR. So this data comes from DWR's annual Big Game Report. So again, this is not my data. I didn't create this data. This is basically the government's data. I just took it out and graphed it in a way that they'll never show you. Okay? And so what we have here, this is the number of mule deer that were killed off of Elk Ridge from 1950. That's as far back as the data is published and available in these reports, up until the present time. And so up from 1950 to 1970, they killed an average of 2,500 deer a year off this unit. It was an open thing, Bible permit, go kill the deer. Okay? And of those 2,500 deer, 1,000 were does. Okay? Then they made mountain lions a game animal. Okay? Nixon banned 1080, and the mule deer population dropped like a rock. Okay? Again, this is no wolves. This is primarily a mountain lion problem. In fact, the mule deer numbers were so low for 4 years, basically our Fish and Game Department closed the season on Elk Ridge. And how often do you ever see a game department here, anywhere in the West, ever close the season because there isn't enough stuff to hunt? Okay, they did this in this unit and a couple other units. And then they opened it up as a limited entry, bucks only draw thing. So this is one of the things you got to have now, 8 or 9 trout points before you can draw this permit on this stuff. And they started out with 300 or 400 permits, and if you draw the permit, unless you're crazy like me, everybody shoots a deer. Okay? They're down now to issuing 40 permits a year. And that includes all the muzzleloader hunts, all the bow and arrow hunts, and all the gun hunts. So now one mountain lion alone in a year can kills more mule deer off of Elk Ridge than all the hunters put together. And oh yes, it's not really Elk Ridge. It's E period, L period, K period, named after an early Texas outfit that first ran cattle in the area in the late 1800s. Elk did not appear in the system until here when, according to the locals, Fish and Game did an illegal, unauthorized transplant of elk. And so the reason the mountain lions were able to take the deer down to virtually extinction, or close to it, was the fact that they had an alternative training to just switch to killing elk. But elk are, because of their larger size, are not quite as vulnerable, you know, to the impact of mountain lion predation as mule deer are. And so they survive on elk. Whenever they run across a more vulnerable mule deer, they just nail it. Now there's also bears in the system that take predators, black bears, and there's coyotes, but those are not obligate carnivores on mule deer. I mean, basically, mountain lions are obligate carnivores. They do kill elk, but they prefer to kill mule deer, just because of the size. Okay? Habitat is irrelevant. Everything game biologists have told you and been taught at the universities for the last 40 years is totally and absolutely wrong. Okay? Like Central Yellowstone, it's still in a park. You know, there's no oil and gas drilling in Central Yellowstone. Why aren't they up there? Or in Banff National Park? Or why aren't the mule deer there on the Elk Ridge? And that's why I use these examples, because there's no confounding influences. The habitat is still there, but the animals are no longer there. But what about habitat improvements? Won't that save the day? And this, of course, is where I get cross with the Elk Foundation and I get cross with the Mule Deer Foundation. Because their whole message is give us money, we'll do habitat stuff, you know, buy conservation easements, and everything will be hunky-dory. Well, I hate to say this because I know there's some members that's working for Fish and Wildlife here, but Don Payne and I agree on the predator stuff. We don't agree on a bunch of this other stuff. I mean, according to Don Payne and those people, I forget how many tens of millions of dollars the state of Utah has spent over the last 10 years doing habitat projects, and it's been great for elk. In fact, we have way too many elk in the state, and DWR and Sportsman Fish and Wildlife just tried to fire me because my data that I collect on aspen shows they're butchering the aspen stands in Utah. The elk. We have way too many elk on that stuff on. But what's it done for the mule deer? It's done nothing for the mule deer. Our mule deer, our general mule deer gun hunt last year in Utah was down to 5 days. Okay? And the state's been into 5 regions for a number of years, and you have to draw a permit. There's no over-the-counter permits. It hasn't been for I forget how many years in Utah for mule deer. And in some regions, like the southern region, which is the most popular, you have to have 2 or 3 preference points before you can actually draw the license. They're changing that system next year. You're going to have 28 units, deer units, and you're going to have to draw for everything. Utah. No, habitat things won't save you, because like in Banff National Park, they prescribe burn 80 square miles. Okay? This is more than you're ever going to get the Forest Service to do unless they let a wildfire go. Okay? They prescribe burning program, not to improve wildlife habitat per se, but what drives management in Parks Canada is what's called ecological integrity. And they realize all the biodiversity and all these warm, fuzzy words that you hear that don't mean too much and do not have rigorous definitions on this thing. Basically, what drives all that is the vegetation dynamics. Okay, and they realized long before they met me, all the data shows, the fire history data, the fire scar data, the stand age analysis data, the repeat photo data, all shows they used to have a high frequency of low intensity fires, but they have no lightning strikes. They've had like 2 lightning-caused fires in the last 60 years. It was all native burning. Native people actually created the stuff you think was natural. They were into native burning long before they met me. So they burnt this 80 square miles, not to improve elk habitat, but of course it does. So did this help the elk in Banff? No, it just made it easier for the wolves to find. The research shows they just took the wolves down faster. I mean, the wolves took the elk down faster. And again, this too has all been published in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. Wolves are now in the process of wiping out the woodland and mountain caribou across the length and breadth of Canada. And this again is another example of predator-mediated competition, and of my contention that this is the norm rather than the exception. Prior to European settlement, and for various reasons which I can explain, there were virtually no moose in Canada. Since European settlement, the moose numbers have popped way up, so this supports a large base population of wolves. Whenever they run across a more vulnerable caribou, they just nail it. And they're going towards extinction. So if moose increases, wolves increase, caribou go right in the toilet. And luckily you should be able to read this, and I just want you to read the title here, is there's a man here, this is an editorial in one of Canada's leading newspaper, the Edmonton Journal, about how you save woodland caribou. And his old idea about how to save woodland caribou is you create a new national park, high game fence it, electric fence it, live trap all the predators, throw all the predators out, and then put the caribou in. The only way they're going to survive. Okay? The important point of that is who wrote the editorial. His name is Dick Decker. His name is Dr. Dick Decker. He's the only rational wolf advocate I've ever met in my life. Dick Decker and I are friends. He does not lie. Okay? He knows exactly what wolves do. We may have different value systems and different desired future conditions, but I don't live in Canada.